This is a forum that has been called for by the leadership of this province, and this is what our elders have been calling for. So today we're gathered here to start a process on directing our energies as First Nations leaders, elders, women, youth, on not only understanding what treaty is, but also implementing what that treaty agreement was, to secure for our children and our children's children a future, a good future, as it was intended.
The objectives here is to look at the treaty history in Saskatchewan as a grounding for the discussions as we move forward today and tomorrow. I want to look at the clarification of the roles and responsibilities. What is the responsibility of the FSIN when we're advocating for treaty? What is the responsibility of the tribal councils, the commissions, the individual First Nations, the treaty areas, the Assembly of First Nations, and even Treaties 1 to 11? How do we coordinate activities, plan initiatives to move forward together in unity? And to clarify the role of the Office of the Treaty Commissioner. And then, of course, the treaty partners. How do we work with the Crown and Right of Canada and the Crown and Right of Saskatchewan, if necessary, to move forward on treaty implementation? What are their obligations and role? And, of course, the discussions between the inherent right to self-determination, which includes self-government, and the implementation of that right and the implementation of treaty, and how do those interact with one another. And, of course, the beginnings of the development of a strategic plan.
It is up to First Nations citizens to assess this obstacle to effective, prosperous government, to provide us with the opportunity to renew our commitment, to reaffirm our sacred vows to the generations that come before us, and to bravely dare to believe that treaty trumps policy. Our political existence has for the last century been defined for us in that Indian Act. We must now organize and develop our own vision, or remain trapped in this upside-down world where we call ourselves nations, but depend on and answer to the Crown. Many of our people fear the consequences of abandoning this, then welcome the uncertainty of a future in which we control our own destinies. But to restore our link with the land and govern ourselves and participate in a broader and national global economy, we must set the new course ourselves. No one else can pull us free.
The spirit and the intent. Our teacher, our elder that led the pipe ceremony, his father spoke to me. 4 days one time we were fasting, explained this to me. What happened in Fort Pitt, what happened, the spiritual part, the oral part, and why we have the inherent right. Kaya Deus kan inheritance. From the land, when the beginning of time and the creation. Many of us don't know that history. Many of our young people don't know that history. The spirit of the treaty, Musum Jim Kenneth Potato, said you as chiefs are only fighting half the battle when you start talking treaty. You are going to be surrounded with people also in leadership that will have the education and the cunning of the white man, will have that knowledge here on paper. Kaya kia, be mindful, not you. You learn this. Hang on to this. These are the teachings of that inherent right of a people, the inheritance of this land. I've had to go back to learn the creation story of what happened and why we are keepers of the land. Musum said, the spirit of the treaty is alive. Nusum, look at this, he said. 5:30 in the morning, he come and open the sweat lawns. Lifted the pipe. He come up the hill with my helpers after we smoke. The treaty is alive. But Chugutan, he said, Musum's son coming up over the tree line. He picked a blade of grass. This is alive. That son is alive. the water in the lake, in the river, that spirit is still alive. The treaties. That's the inheritance of us as people.
I was raised by my grandmother. I was educated in the Nehio way. We talked about the Creator, talked about the sun, the moon, talked about the pipe, the stem of the pipe, the sweet grass. Kia no. Ikikini taugia. Mau eke otspe miguya. Moi wapske will otspe miguya. Said the government did not give those to us. They were given from the Creator. Nobody can take your treaty away from you. We talk about our treaty rights. Kipmat soon no. Tansi swaskawita yaho makikawi noski. What do we do? Tansis kanoap maya kichay sini no.
Since time immemorial, the beginning, the creation of that story tells us that the Creator gave us this land, and in return we were to protect it and keep it pure. This is a sacred promise.
That is really the things that we're here to talk about today. How the treaty terms respect our rights, our sovereignty.
Self-determination means that people have the right to freely determine their own political status and future decisions over their lands and resources. We fought in the United Nations for years to have that right enshrined in the Declaration.
We believe our sovereign is the Creator. We are the subjects of the Creator. Our laws are the will of the Creator. The Creator's laws applies to and governs the entire universe.
The treaties that we made with the British Crown were recognized in 1989 by the United Nations when they agreed to study treaties that were made between states and indigenous peoples. That meant that these treaties are international agreements. The United Nations does not undertake studies of domestic issues, as they say in international law. And so our treaties are international agreements.
When it comes to implementing and talking about our inherent rights that are granted by the Creator, we're born with them, and we inherit them from generation to generation. Our traditions, our customs, our practices, our spiritual beliefs, our language, our culture, our inherent rights to land and resources, our inherent rights to self-determination, which includes governance, our inherent rights to education, social development, health, inherent rights to lands and resources that includes water, and of course our inherent rights to air. Now we know when we went to make those treaties, we did not put all those inherent rights on the table for negotiation. A whole range of those inherent rights we can identify as reserved by treaty making, which still remains our responsibility. A whole range of those inherent rights are recognized by treaty making, and we can identify which ones were confirmed by treaty making in the form of treaty rights and benefits.
The Treaty 1 to 11 movement is about understanding the treaty. And it's about building power to make sure that the Crown ultimately fulfills the treaty promises that are outstanding and owing to our people. Like the treaty right to a livelihood, to natural resources, our sovereignty over our traditional lands, water, the treaty right for us to decide on measures of conservation and habitat protection for the animals and so on. These are all treaty rights, not just the right to hunt, fish, and trap. Our treaties are about culture, are about our society, the preservation of our way of life, our survival as nations. Ultimately, treaties are about freedom.
The key number one thing about treaty implementation is lands and resources. When you actually benefit from them, you can provide the services that your people think they should have.
Treaty was never a deal about real estate, about selling land. It was about sharing our lands and resources, but never giving them up.
Under treaty, our chiefs did not agree to give up the whole country and the minerals in exchange for nothing. The NRT is a treaty violation. We never gave up our consent or resources to be transferred. The Crown requested to use some of our lands to the depth of the plow.
In the treaty rights, resources, and lands is the collective right. And what Canada is trying to do is it's trying to individualize you.
If we don't bring that title under Cree title or Dene title or Dakota title or Ojibwe title, we are vulnerable to federal legislation, making the reserves into parcels of land in fee simple so that individual people in the reserve can have title to a small piece of land. The only way we can protect ourselves from that kind of assimilation is for that title to remain under our sovereignty, period.
We have an obligation and responsibility to assert our inherited rights and powers, impacting on how we form our governments, assert our jurisdiction, and implement our laws.
The laws we never gave up under treaty, the natural laws of the Creator, the inherent rights, the right to maintain our own traditional ways of living.
We have to get out and begin making laws. All we got to do is plan what we want to deliver and get them done.
When we look at the whole process of structuring these new legal and political institutions and structures of government, it also includes the recognition that's there by the framework that governs us today with the Crown, our capacity to deal with international relations.
As we're evolving in our political struggle with Canada, where we're trying to seek our political freedom through the treaties, we are growing as well. So the Assembly First Nations gets stronger, FSIN becomes more powerful, the tribal councils become stronger, and that the treaty movement becomes even more stronger than it is right now. So what we have to do now, this is my own understanding, is that the chiefs now have to be brave enough to delegate not power. You never delegate power to FSIN or Tribal Council or Treaty 4 or Treaty 1 to 11. You delegate responsibility. You delegate duty. They will always have to come back to you in terms of jurisdiction as well.
At all times when we take on the role of leadership, you got to know your enemy. You got to know him inside out. You got to know his policies, how he lives and breathes. You also have to know your opportunities. And if we say we're colonized, we got to decolonize. And you know what? If we're assimilated, we have to re-assimilate our people with our own culture, with our own beliefs, with our own identity. That is, treaty is the coexistence in this land.
If we don't start understanding what is going on in Ottawa, we are going to feel the effects of it immensely and greatly. The government has unilaterally done things. And as First Nations, we need to support our elders, our spiritual people who we go to ask for that support and guidance in carrying on the spirit of that prayer in the work that we do every day.
We have been told, and we have heard many times from federal and provincial crowns and the general public at large, that treaty implementation may be nothing more than just an illusion that we can never hope to attain. We are here, we will always be here, just like our treaties.
I know if we hang on to our elders' teachings and we hang on to that spirit and intent and that covenant, that's where we need to keep going. We're starting to look at our Treaty 4 territory as being traditional territory. So it's extend our jurisdiction beyond our reserves to our traditional treaty territories. So we need to have our laws in place so we occupy the field. And that's what we all have to do, is to go home and do that.
As we get older, we're getting wiser too. And part of getting wise is becoming kinder. That kindness will seep into our communities, that our people will now, eventually in the next while, begin to appreciate that their leaders are there to work for them.
Our consultants, our people out on the reservations, our people in the communities, our people in the urban centers. That's the people we want to be talking to. That's the people that will give us advice and make or break our future. So we have to look at those people, and this is how we're going to have to rebuild.
One of the things I wanted to discuss, focus on the people. I think we need to reawaken the people. And one of the first things we have to focus on in a real practical sense is welfare. The second thing we need to address is healing. We need to address healing and wellness. What I'm proposing is our own system through a balance of spirituality, mental, all of those 4 areas. We need to teach our parents how to be parents. Those old ladies, that help bring children into the world, we need to utilize those older ladies in terms of how do you care for a child.
We want this generation to tell different stories than the ones we have been telling for the past 7 generations. Stories of pride and resilience, stories in our languages about our cultures and our ways of life, stories of self-government and prosperity.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you will rise with me, we shall say a prayer to the Creator and thank the Creator for everything.
I thank you for your patience, your commitment. That is very important. Let's pray. And thank the Creator. Thank the Creator for this day. Kananas kumaya. And with that, Witzihik, help me.